Good morning and welcome to the Morning Mindshift. This morning we're thinking about love, particularly our intimate relationships. So our sexual relationships, the relationships past or present, future, with our partner or partners. I don't judge. Let's start, as we always do, by setting the scene. So what we're going to do first is take our mental pulse. So this is basically us looking with as much depth as possible at how we feel on the subject. So we're trying to explore our subconscious. How do we explore our subconscious? Well, we have to be able to hear our internal dialogue. We have to be able to hear what's going on at a subconscious level. How do we hear that, or what does that sound like? That's that internal voice, dialogue, self-talk, the angel or demon on your shoulder. Think of it however you like. It's the narrative we're running in here. And the reason that's important is the narrative we're running in here dictates how we behave, and our behavior dictates our outcomes. So if we want to maintain an outcome that we already enjoy, or we want to improve upon something in terms of our outcomes, or we want to mitigate a complete disaster of an outcome that we've experienced before, we have to go, right, what about our behaviors producing that? And how is our behavior influenced by that subconscious narrative? Once we can hear the narrative, hear the story, I'm going to refer to stories a lot. Once we can hear those stories, then you can look at, what are the beliefs that underlie them, and perpetuate them and keep them coming back again and again and again. And then once we have that awareness, we don't castigate ourselves or bury them in a little box. We just see them for what they are, which is a choice. It's not automatic, it's a choice. All of the time, we're making a choice between acting or not acting on a story, whether it serves us or whether it limits us. We're making those choices hundreds of times throughout our day. Now, it might feel like everything's on autopilot at the moment, but that's because you need space. And the way you try to find that space is first building in awareness. So we're going to start with mental pulse. I'm going to set my timer to 3 minutes, and we're going to think about intimate relationships. Just let the feelings flow. Start writing on your journal. I'm going to be doing this at the same time as you. I'll mute myself. You guys should already have all your cameras and mics off. And then we're just in our own little worlds for the next 3 minutes on intimate relationships. What comes up for you? Let's go. So as we come into the final 15 seconds, just finish the thought you're on there. Today, I want us to think about getting stuck in a limited nature spiral. What the fuck does that mean, Rory? Well, limited nature is when we were acting on our limiting stories. So we've basically got two types of belief: a belief that serves us and a belief that limits us. A belief that serves us is any belief that takes us closer to realizing our vision for who we want to be. So any belief that puts us in the zone, puts us in our state of flow, puts us in what I call free nature, where things are easy and enjoyable. We're still working, we're still facing challenges, but we're doing it with confidence. We're having fun. There's that utter assurance that this is who I am, I've got this. I'm thriving here, right? That being in the zone, being in flow, being in free nature, the more time we spend there, the more time the greater the chance we have of realizing any dream, any vision that we have for ourselves, of achieving any goal that we set for ourselves. The less time we spend there, the less chance we've got to be there. And you're not going to spend time in the zone, in flow, in free nature, if rather than latching onto our serving beliefs, we're defaulting to our limiting beliefs, which create our limiting stories about who we are, about how the world works, about who we are in that world. And they produce behaviors that ultimately are self-sabotaging. So we're going to think about that in the context of love and our intimate relationships today. So we're going to think about this spiral that goes, everything's going great in your relationship with your partner. Well, it's not that everything's going great, it's that you're on autopilot. You're not facing any particular challenges or any stresses, but there's always that kind of background rumbling, that negative self-talk, those limiting stories, right, that are there. And when things are okay, we just ignore them and carry on anyway. And then when the pressure comes on, they flood through into the front of our mind. And suddenly we've got 1,000 grievances that we didn't really realize we had about our partner that we're just carrying around. And if we can't control ourselves and we end up angry, we will either suppress them entirely and withdraw into ourselves and just pull away from that person and deny them love, or we will explode. They're both manifestations of the same thing. And if we explode, we're likely going to say something we regret, because we're going to throw out this dirge. Everything in our subconscious we've been walking around with about them, or about how a relationship should work, or about our sex life, is just boom, out there, right? So it goes trigger, some external stress usually. If we're on autopilot, we're then into that bound nature. We're into that limited nature. We're running that story, we're perpetuating that belief, and then the behavior is we withdraw, we deny them love, or we explode with anger, or some other variation between those two extremes, right? And then we've got to self-soothe. We've got to make ourselves feel better in some way. We feel better, we make ourselves feel better with more withdrawal, or we double down on the anger, or we escape into gambling or pornography or shopping or reality TV or scrolling social media or binging food or drinking alcohol or chain smoking cigarettes or taking drugs, whatever it might be. It's likely going to be really unhealthy physically and mentally. And because it is, it's then followed by shame and regret and remorse. And that just weakens us and lets our limiting stories run riot and reinforces all those limiting beliefs about ourselves. So it's not serving us at all. And of course, then when the next stressor comes along, the next flashpoint with the partner, the next external thing that interrupts your autopilot life, you're weakened and left less able to deal with it because you're running that spiral. So let's have a look at that at some more depth today. So let's think about, forget the external stress, the source of the argument, it could be anything. So we've done a mental pulse, looking at how you feel, looking at that background kind of resonating noise. Now we're going to look at a little more depth. So let's be specific. When we think about our most intimate relationship or relationships, sexual relationships, long-term loving relationships with our partners, like what are the stories that we're running here? Okay, so let's take 2 minutes. What are the stories you repeatedly tell yourself about them, about you with them, about sex, about how it should be, how it shouldn't be? Let's go. 2 minutes on stories. Sorry to interrupt, but there'll be good stories in there as well. There'll be serving stories. Those we want to note down because we want to give them their own space and amplify them. But we're particularly interested in what are the limiting stories. Last 15 seconds to just wrap up that thought there on limiting stories. And now we're going to think about the beliefs that might underlie the stories. So if we have the story, and let's pull some stories out around love and intimate relationships to give you an example. Say you don't think there's enough sex in your relationship. You might have stories around, well, a relationship needs that. It's the glue that holds us together. Without it, we're just friends, and friendship isn't enough. It could be that on the limiting side. On the serving side, it might be the self-same situation. Its shadow side, its serving side in this context would be, well, a long-term relationship, what it really needs for success is communication, cooperation, an ability to work towards a common goal. You know, we need complementary personality traits. Our political and moral guidelines, values, call them what you want, they need to align with one another. You know, that's ultimately what sustains something over decades. Now, I'm not suggesting one is true and one is untrue. There are examples of stories that could be limiting, could be serving in that same relationship scenario. So now we're thinking about what are the beliefs that underlie the stories. So what belief is producing a relationship without sex isn't worth it, or friendship isn't enough? on that side of things. I'm less interested in the serving beliefs because we want to maintain those. We don't mind selecting for those on a daily basis. There's nothing wrong with believing that, or there's nothing non-serving about, I don't want to put a value judgment on it. There's nothing non-serving about believing that a relationship is founded on communication and cooperation and having a common objective and both buying into that. That's not necessarily not serving you, right? But what isn't serving you is maybe something like, I'm going to leave this person because we haven't had sex for a month or 2 or 3, whatever it is, right? So let's think about that. 2 minutes on the beliefs that underlie your stories. As we go into the last 30 seconds here, if you've been doing this for a while, you'll notice that when we chase that belief to its ultimate depth, it isn't really about love or about sex or about relationships. It's about something more fundamental. And I noticed here myself, I'll give you a sort of little glimpse into my own journaling because I'm doing this as you guys are this morning. Just end that timer alarm, end of the 2 minutes there. That it ultimately, I worked through a few layers there very, very quickly in that 90 seconds. And it came back to this belief that I hold that is two-sided. It can be serving, but it can also be limiting. Obviously, I'm concerned about the mitigating the limiting aspects of it and amplifying the serving aspects of it. But it's Rory, you must maximize your potential. And that will show up in the gym. It will show up in my business. It'll show up in my relationship. And today we're thinking about our relationships. And I hadn't even thought about that dictating how I think about relationships. And I do this all the time. And I just got there in 90 seconds this morning. So you could always discover a new connection. I knew that belief existed, and I have thought about it from the point of view of my identity around my business and wealth and everything else, but I hadn't thought about it in my relationship. Okay, this idea that I have to maximize everything. And that means, you know, there's a certain impatience, a lack of contentment. And if that's obviously shown towards your partner, then it can have negative consequences. Or I might start behaving in such a way that puts me in that downward spiral where I push, she withdraws, I get more angry, she withdraws even further. Okay, so we're thinking about that. Then I'm trapped in that spiral, feeling guilty about getting angry, about pushing, etc. and so on, not amplifying the serving stuff between the two of us. Right, now we're going to reset a little bit. We're coming out of how we feel at a subconscious level, and we're kind of setting our direction for the future. So we're going to do this with 10 diaphragmatic breaths. So I want you to place the tips of your first two fingers on your sternum, because your rib cage isn't going to move, and we're going to judge that by keeping those fingers there, and then the tips of your first two fingers on your other hand just resting on your diaphragm, that band of muscle at the top of your stomach just below your rib cage. And you're going to breathe from the diaphragm. As you breathe in, push into your bottom fingers. These top two fingers on the rib cage are staying where they are, because you're not breathing from up here, shallow, high, stressed, anxious. We're breathing from the diaphragm. Deep, relaxed, rest and digest, parasympathetic, get that activation. Try to clear your mind now. So as you take that breath in, feel the muscle in your diaphragm. Feel the bracing through your core on that in-breath, and then release. Feel. 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 Feel your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let your spine relax back in the chair. Feel. And your heart rate will have slowed. Your breathing will have slowed down a little bit. You will have started to relax. I can feel it now. I'm slightly heady, even from a few deep breaths, moving me from sympathetic, that fight or flight, which isn't very sympathetic to your body, ironically, into that parasympathetic rest and digest. I'm even talking more slowly, I notice now. So let's look ahead. We're going to set a 1-year vision for your most key intimate relationship. So we're going to detail everything that we want that to be, and crucially, who you could be without limitation. So if your narrative is not one of limiting stories, reinforcing limiting beliefs about yourself in a relationship, about love, about sex, about how relationships work, who could you be? And if you could be that person where you're in the zone, where you're in flow, where you're in free nature all the time, and you're achieving what you want to achieve, what do you end up with in a year's time? Let's spend 3 minutes working on that. as we come into the last 30 seconds of our 3 minutes on vision, those who've been doing this for a while, think about your values. If you've not touched upon values before, we're gonna do a week dedicated on values soon, so that's going to come up. But start to think about your values around who you are in a loving relationship. And if you're finding it hard to think about who you are, think about what you want from a loving relationship, or how you think a successful, intimate relationship functions. Like, what does it hang on? What does it need? And then think about, does that relate to your inspiration statement? For those values referred to in your inspiration statement. For those of you that don't have an inspiration statement yet, again, like values, it's coming up. We're going to do a week on it. But an inspiration statement is effectively a shorthand for your vision, for everything you want to achieve, for who you could be without limitation. Because you, without limitation, can achieve anything that you set your mind to. So that's the most important bit, who you are without limitation. Because the what will just happen. It's the who that we need to focus on. So we're going to do that in a bit more depth now with some imagination theatre. Now this is now a pens down, eyes closed exercise. So sit back in your chair, close your eyes, and remember, we're thinking about love, intimate relationships today. So that's going to be our focus. So a year from now, referring to that vision that you've just written out, pick a location. You're inside in a room, you're outside in nature. You're in a locale, a fixed locale for this visualization. What can you see around you? What temperature is it? The air temperature outside, the conditions in the room. Think about that room. Look to your left. Look to your right. Look above you. Feel the quality of the space. What emotions does the space elicit? What are some of the objects that you can see around you? What do they mean to you? What's the weather through the window or against your skin? What emotions does that elicit? Why is that the weather, the air temperature, the room, the object in your visualization? What about those things is meaningful to you? Or what metaphorical significance might they have at a subconscious level? Explore that later. For now, let's come back to, what are you wearing? How do you feel in your clothes? How do you feel in your body? Your partner's just walked into the room, but they've come and stood beside you outside. You turn and look at them. How do they look at you? How do you look back at them? What feeling are you both experiencing in that moment? Specifically, how do you feel in that moment? What are they wearing? If you haven't met them yet, what do they look like? What have you guys done that day already? And what are you about to go and do with your day? How do you have fun? What do you share or have in common? How's your sex life? They turn and go to leave the room or go to do something else outside. They look back at you. What's the last thing they say to you? Okay, so there was a little bit of imagination theatre on our intimate partner. Who they currently are in a year's time, how you'd like that to look, how you'd like to feel. It's all about, crucially, about how you'd like to feel. Because if it's a functioning relationship that has a future, all you need to do is get in the zone, get in the flow, be in free nature as much as you possibly can. Live out your values in conjunction with your vision, and that relationship will improve significantly just by you being who you could be without limitation. And if you inspire them to come on that journey with you, then it will improve exponentially. If you haven't met them yet, what intention are you going into a relationship with in terms of who you want to be in that new relationship? You know, the values that you want to hold to firstly attract the type of person that you want to be with, and then secondly, to grow with them. Okay, so that's what we're thinking about there. Now, it's time to get real. So we're going to take an honest accounting of where we are now versus that incredible emotive vision that we've just created. So let's spend 3 minutes now thinking about, okay, here is my reality. That is who I desire to be, or who I could be without limitation in the context of my relationships. What's that gap between the here and a year's time? 3 minutes. as we come into the last 30 seconds there on direction, we're starting to form our thoughts around, okay, if this is where we are, or if this is who we are now in ourselves in that relationship, or single looking for an intimate relationship, and this is who we want to be. I think perhaps it would have been handy if this thought came to me sooner, but the most intimate relationship you have is with yourself. So when we're thinking about who, we're thinking about who we are, not who we want to be with, not who might save us, not who might complement us, who we might be compatible with. Who are we? Who are we who we love, who we look after, who we care for? Because if we love ourselves and we care for ourselves and we put ourselves in the zone, in the flow, in free nature, we radiate an authenticity that's incredibly attractive to everybody around us. We encourage them subconsciously to do the same. And when we're both doing that, we're moving towards the best expression of our love or intimacy that we could possibly have, right? So the end of that direction is about now, okay, how do you create that then? And that's about intentionality. Now, we could set bigger picture goals around this, and perhaps we will in coming weeks. We're going to have a goal setting week as well. But for now, all I want you to focus on is what can you action in the next 12 hours? You know, this is about winning the morning to win the day. So let's have actions we can execute today that are going to make an improvement. So 2, maximum 3, definitely no more than 3 intentions around love and intimacy that you can execute in the next 12 hours that are going to answer that gap between the honest accounting of the here and now you just took and that vision that you had for a year's time. What's going to bridge that gap? 3 intentions in the next 2 minutes, starting now. You've got another 50 seconds to think of those 3 intentions. Now, at the end of the day, we come back and we do an exercise called positive proof. At the end of today, you're looking for positive proof around love and intimacy. Now, in your relationship, it may be there already. However, if you're going through a tough time, perhaps there isn't going to be anything positive from today necessarily, although I urge you to try to find something. And I strongly believe there will be something there, especially if you act with intention. But reach back into the past. If you're not in a relationship at the moment, look back for that positive proof about who you could be without limitation in a relationship. And if nothing else, look at whether you've executed your intentions for today. So at the end of the day, you're going to take 2 minutes to yourself before bed, before you go to sleep, in your journal, noting down as many wins, so positive things that are reinforcing that sense of self, that who without limitation around love and intimacy. Find as many of those as you can in 2 minutes before bed tonight, so that we can build that burden of positive proof at a subconscious level. That was a great session on love, intimate relationships today. It was a little bit longer than usual, about 10 minutes longer than usual, but I think incredibly beneficial for that extra 10 minutes. So go forth, take this feeling out into the world today and execute, my friends. Good luck. Bye-bye.